Oh, well. Recording in progress. Here we go. All right. So for the administrative rules, we've gone through all of the affirmative obligations. We're halfway through the thou shalt nots. And let me pull this over on screen. My kaleidoscope of rules with all my documentation and important things. And Parker, I can see you're studying this just real intently, and that's probably a good thing for you. I'm just saying. So today we are going to be doing rules L through N. And so the first one is pay a finder's fee or give any valuable consideration to an unlicensed person. So we get this one all the time, and I get the question all the time, what is the amount I can pay for what's the key word here? Anyone?
Unsolicited.
Unsolicited. Brandon, for us, those of us in South County, could you educate us what that means, unsolicited?
Send me all your friends, but I'm not going to say anything about paying you.
I like that. That's totally acceptable. What you can't have, I'm going to introduce a little Latin here. You cannot have a quid pro quo. You do this, I will do that, right? There cannot be an arrangement. That is the key here. And if there is no arrangement and somebody sends you, there is a maximum amount that you can compensate somebody. And it got updated a couple of years ago, and it's now $250, which is not insignificant, right?
When was the last time somebody got in trouble?
What's that?
When was the last time somebody got in trouble for this?
You know what? It actually does happen. And if you pay attention to the quarterly and you read between the lines, you can see what's going on. It's not as frequent, but it does happen. This isn't really the most significant one. Let's move on to M. Accept a referral from a lender or a broker. Doesn't even give a dollar amount. You cannot accept not a referral fee from a lender or title or anybody else, right? They actually go so far as to call out not only the LO, they call out the assistant lending manager and the PLM. The PLM, for those that don't know on the lending side, is roughly the equivalent of the principal broker in the lending world. So yeah, you cannot have, again, there's that Latin phrase again, a quid pro quo. You cannot have an arrangement where, hey, people that you, if I send them over to your loan officer or your organization, you're going to pay me some money for sending those over. So how do we get around that with AIG?
It doesn't go directly to us.
Yeah, there you go. It's going to a company that we have ownership in. And Ron spent a lot of time with attorneys making sure we were compliant with CFPB rules, DRE rules, RESPA. And so that's a good thing for us. The last one is act as a real estate agent or a broker in the same transaction in which the licensee also acts as a LO, a lending manager, or a PLM. So we do have a few people here in our Utah County office. We have Susan Crawford and Tammy Shaw, who are employed by Intralend, but they're also real estate agents with our PG office. So on deals where they're working as the LO, they cannot be the realtor and vice versa. So, all right, that is that. What I wanted to cover today is
hey Matt, where are the administrative rules located if we wanted to review those?
Yeah, so good question. If you go, I highly suggest people just create a bookmark for them, right? If you go to wow, that's the first time that's happened. Let's go back and try that again. realestate.utah.gov is unsafe. So if you go, actually, let me do one other tab. This is where you would really start, right? You go to the Utah Division of Real Estate and come down to the real estate section, click on that. And I mean, there is a wealth of information here, right? I mean, this is where most people know to go. They go to enforcement because that's where the quarterly newsletters are. But, and Daryl, I'm glad you brought this up, right? Because there's two components. You guys are on this screen, so I keep talking over here. We got to remember my camera's over here. There's two components. The primary component is the Real Estate License Practice Act, right? Which is essentially the Utah Code. That is what was approved legislatively to govern what we do. Then they put in a bureaucratic entity known as the Division of Real Estate, who is responsible for enforcing the Real Estate License Practices Act by creating administrative rules, right? So just remember that sequence. It's the Real Estate License Practices Act through the DRE and their administrative rules. So if you go on here, I actually download mine a long time ago to a PDF so that I can mark them up, the important things, and there we go. Statute and administrative rules right there. So you can go to the act here, you can go to the administrative rules here, and if you just want to know what's changed recently, go to the new administrative rules, and that'll give you the delta that has changed since the last time they met.
So are you assuming we can see what you're talking about?
Oh, crap. Am I not sharing still?
No.
Hold on.
I only asked because I wanted it in the recording.
Let me quickly rehash that. Now you can see what's on my screen, right? So I'm going to quickly back up. If you go to the Division of Real Estate, you're going to land here because they cover mortgage, they cover appraisal. So make sure you click on the real estate button and it's going to take you to this interface. Thank you for catching that, Daryl. And if you go down to, what is that, the seventh item, statute and administrative rules, right? So you have the Licensing Practices Act and you have the administrative rules underneath that. And then of course, all the new changes. And I have people making faces outside my door trying to distract me. So there you have it. That is where you would find it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. All right. So I get questions, a lot of them pretty frequently. There are some that are more common than others. And this week I wanted to address offer structure. I mean, that's a big umbrella, but specifically within that, I wanted to talk about, because I can't tell you how many questions I get on this. And it seems so fundamental, so please don't tune out because I don't think you know everything you should know potentially on this. What are the three things you can do with an offer? What are the three contractual things you can do with an offer? Yeah, Brandon, I read your mind. Parker, give me one. What's the easiest one?
Write it.
Okay. Once it's written, what can you do with it?
Reject, counter.
Accept, reject, and counter offer. And you know what? And Daryl, you added a fourth, and I was going to add that as an asterisk. And oh, by the way, once there is a contract in place, you can addend it. So I wanted to talk to each one of these just a little more in detail, right? So accepting seems pretty straightforward, right? Right?
You would
So
think so.
here's a little bit of a quiz. What does it take to accept an offer? We've covered this.
It takes all signatures and communication.
Be a little more specific.
So it takes all signatures from the parties and communication via email, text message, phone call to the corresponding agent.
What are you communicating to them?
That there's been an accepted offer.
That specifically that signatures, the contract has been executed. It has been accepted, right? And you're right. It doesn't call out. It doesn't have to be text. It doesn't have to be email. You don't have to deliver a signed copy. All it says, it has to be communicated that it's actually been executed, right? Which
I'm just covering my bases.
Yeah. So pet peeve of mine is that our contracts are not, our current REPSI is not congruent because there's acceptance. So really just two criteria. It's got to be signed. It's got to be communicated that it was signed. However you do that. If you've done that, you have an accepted offer. However, once the offer is accepted, Dan and I, we had this discussion a while ago, once it is accepted, if you want to give any type of notice, which would include a cancellation, it has 3 criteria. It's got to be in writing, it's got to be signed by the parties, and it has to be delivered. Right? Those of us that have been in the business long enough remember that pre-2009, that was a requirement of our REPC, that actually had copies had to be delivered. That was a term of acceptance. It's no longer the case. So just be aware of that. I don't know why they did that. I can see some benefits, but I can see certainly some downsides. All right. So my notes here I have, hey, acceptance seems really simple, right? But what happens? So let's do a theoretical here, because you've never had a deal like this, I'm sure. Whether you wrote it or you received it, it's a REPC, it has an FHA addendum, it has subject to sell addendum, and then it has a blank addendum that has some other extraneous term. So you got 3 addenda, plus the REPC, okay? Acceptance should be straightforward. What happens when you wrote that offer and the other side sends it back, the REPC's checked, and it's all by the timeline, the acceptance, by the way, there is no such thing as an acceptance deadline response deadline. There's only an acceptance deadline. I get that all the time too. Well, they didn't meet the response deadline. I'm like, what's the response deadline? Well, you know, the end of the paragraph. You're like, oh, the acceptance, right? So what happens if they check, yep, accepted on the REPC, they reject the FHA addendum, and they accept the subject to sale addendum, and they accept the 3rd addendum? Where are we?
The whole thing's rejected.
Explain that, Brandon. Why is it rejected? Or does anybody disagree with him?
Because it's the
Don't we
biggest
have a
one.
meeting of the minds?
Because it's the biggest one.
Say that again.
Because it's the biggest one.
Okay, but I want the rationale. I mean, we're recording this. Somebody's going to watch this someday in the future, and I want them to understand, why is it
The
rejected?
REPC referenced FHA addendum.
It did. It did. It said, and you
What's
know what,
that?
Stockton, you bring up a good point. It's not a condition. I mean, it's not
Well-
your argument is not based on the fact that it said there's an FHA addendum. What if they accepted the FHA addendum and they rejected the subject to sell? Aren't we in the same boat?
Well, let's go one up on it and say that 3rd addendum was a commission addendum that was asking for 0.5% because the commission was 2.5%. And let's say that they rejected that addendum, but they accepted the offer. So the offer is still
there's
in
the
play.
fundamental question.
The offer is accepted. That addendum is not, but the offer is accepted.
You fell for the trap.
Okay.
So in section 9, let's I'm going to share my screen again. So if we go to, I got to move this banner over here. If I go to forms, legacy forms, let's just pull up a real estate purchase contract. And thanks for bearing with me, because language is important in contracts. It's almost paramount, right? So if you go to section 9, right? Addenda, there are or are not. So in our case, there was a blank addendum 1 that had some extraneous term. There was an FHA addendum, and then there was another, which was the subject to sell. So going back to your pre-licensing days, I know it's been a long time for most of you, all of you. What constitutes the offer? If I come in here, Parker, even though they should not be negotiating commissions in the REPC, because they do it, does it invalidate the REPC? No, you're just in the crosshairs of the DRE, right? But it is a term specific. There's a term in the legal contract world called the 4 corners of the contract. What is in the contract, right? And so when I send forward an offer that says it's the REPC and addendum 1, 2, and 3, I don't even care what addenda 1, 2, and 3 are at this point. If you don't accept everything, because the addenda are incorporated as part of the contract. So if you reject anything less than what I put forward, back to Brandon's point, the offer is rejected. Because it's not the same offer. You can't Chinese menu it and say, well, I like that and I like this, but I don't like that. So this is what I'm going to accept. Stockton, then Dan.
So what if I write into my REPC on section 9, addendum 1, 2, and 3, and then I send over addendums 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they accept 1, 2, and 3 and reject addendum 4, and I never referenced it, the original REPC.
What says the group?
Then you're no go on addendum 4, but you have an accepted contract on the REPC and addendums 1, 2, 3.
You screwed up as an agent, Stockton. No.
They accepted it.
But yeah, I mean, the original contract says this is the extent of it, right? And if you sent something in addition to that, it's not incorporated into the offer.
So it's just whatever's referenced in section 9.
Yep. Now, if you sent, let's use your example, section 9 has 1, 2, and 3, and you do send a 4th and they do accept the 4th, is it part of the contract?
Yes.
Yes, it is. It's like an addendum. So Parker, coming full circle to your question, whether it was negotiating commissions or anything else, this is the part I want you to stick in everybody's head. If you reject any part of the offer, you have rejected it in its totality. I honestly, I get this, you guys, on a regular basis. I have office managers call me up. What do I do with this? The other side, accepted 2 of the 3 or 1 of the 3 addenda. I'm like, well, we don't have a contract. Well, the agent thinks we do. I'm like, well, we have the unfortunate task of informing the agent and the other agent and their broker on the other side. We don't have a contract. Okay. Dan.
I think Barbara told me something a couple of weeks ago that sounded confusing then, and I didn't have the chance to question it, and I just filed in the back of my head that just sounds weird to me. I'm not exactly sure what she said, so I wanted to. No, but now you're bringing this up, and so it makes me wonder, if I heard her right. But whatever, who cares? Get the REPC. You have addendum. You have the REPC. You have addendum 1 and 2, right?
Yeah.
And you want to counter something in the REPC, but not counter anything in addendum 1 and 2. Do you counter REPC, accept 1 and 2, or is it a counter, or is it counter everything and I counter all of this in addendum 3?
Yeah.
Addendum 3 is only. Do you know where I'm going with this, Matt?
I know exactly where you're going, and you'll be amazed at the amount of prep work I've done today. It's funny that you brought up Barbara, because I've told you guys this, there's no secret here. A lot of times what I train on is what I'm getting hit with. And yes, Barbara hit me about the same time frame, Dan, and I was trying to explain to her this and using a metaphor, and I thought, well, that didn't go so well. It actually needs a visual. So here's my visual. All you that are old enough, remember, either in elementary school or somewhere in your schooling, your teacher would have this overhead transparency projector. Now, forget the title on the slide here, software category. Let's call it REPC and addenda. Okay. And this is what we get, right? And so I have each of these scenarios. So I'm going to put up the first one. This one was, if you have an accepted offer, then you've accepted everything on screen, okay? If we then go to a situation where a counter offer has been accepted, so let's say in this situation that the counter offer is removing a term, it could be removing an addendum, there's no boundaries for what we could be removing, and or introduce a new term. Right? If you accept the counter offer, let's go back to the situation we had. If the offer came over with subject to sell and FHA addendum and third addendum, we've incorporated all that. It doesn't, frankly, we could come back as the seller and counter with several of these components. That becomes a counter offer. We don't like this term. We want to add this term. And if that counteroffer is accepted, it all goes through, just like on screen. Remember, your teacher would be like, they'd take the Sharpie or whatever it was, and they'd strike something out, right? And it would go through onto the screen. And then they'd take another transparency and overlay it on the top, and there's a new term on there. Well, that's how our counteroffers work. They either block something out that was there, or they add something new to the list, okay? And that's cool, right? That's pretty straightforward. It's the closest cousin to just a flat out accepted offer, because frankly, what is a counteroffer?
It's modifying a term of the previous, of the contract, the entirety of the contract that became before it.
It's a new contract.
That's what I was looking for, Brandon. Dan, you are correct, but quite literally, it's a new offer. They're incorporating all the terms that were previously there, but when they turn around and say, I'm counter offering you, that the very wording is that is a new offer. Okay. All right. So that's scenario 2.
So Matt, just a quick question for you. I had a deal this weekend. Well, actually, that's probably the wrong example. I had a deal like a couple of months ago where we attached a real estate brokerage payment addendum to the Rep C. Okay.
Yep.
And it was in.
Was it part of the original offer, or was it a
it was part of the original offer, and it was mentioned in the addendum section. So it was in the addendum section. They accepted the offer, rejected the brokerage payment addendum.
Did they accept the offer then?
That's what I'm asking. So in your terms, if they don't accept it, they've rejected the whole offer.
To be clear, these aren't my terms. This is contract law.
Yeah.
Right. When I offer, so for instance, let's shift metaphors. If I'm selling my truck and trailer, and I put forward that offer to you and say, I'm selling my truck and trailer, right? You say it fast, it's like one, truck and trailer. And you come back and say, well, I'll accept your truck. I'm like, I'm not interested. I offered you my truck and trailer because I don't want either one of them, right? Yep. You come back, we don't have a deal because that's not what I offered you. Well, very much the same way with your purchase contract. Your truck and trailer was the Rep C and the real estate brokerage payment addendum. It's all one thing. If you reject part of it, you reject all of it. And so this is my gripe. I'm telling you, I've had this discussion even with other brokers. They're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to go back to pre-licensing school because this is covered in depth. Whatever is spelled out as the offer is in totality. Even though it may have 3 addenda, it's as if it's one Rep C. And so whatever you do of your 3 options, accept, reject, or counteroffer, you do it across the board on all of them because it is one. You don't get to Chinese menu it and cherry pick the things you like. If you want to do that, what should you do? Keyword of the day: counteroffer.
Counteroffer.
Yeah, counteroffer and say, in your addendum 2, we're removing addendum 1, which is your real estate brokerage payment addendum. And then if you guys accept it, you've accepted the new offer, right? It seems kind of ticky-tack, but it's like really important, the sequencing of this, whether you actually have a contract or you do not. Okay. All right. So counteroffers, very straightforward. If you accept them, the things that are nixed out go away. The things that are added bleed through. All right. So now we go to the next one. What happens if the counteroffer is rejected? Well, then the contract goes back to what was originally there, or it's completely dead. I really should say, I need to put a clarifying item on this. Let's say we go under contract with a Rep C and everybody signs off, it's done on time, we're under contract, counteroffer / addendum. Honestly, the attorneys don't really care so much about the terms, it's more for our convenience. But if an addendum is rejected, what happens?
It's dead. Just the addendum.
Just the addendum, right? So in this situation, if I'm going to go to the next one because this is where it gets fun. What happens if you counteroffer a counteroffer? Right? On some of the items. So I'm sticking with my example.
Is this your new contract or the first contract?
Well, you have the Rep C. I countered you, Brandon, and you're like, well, I like some of the terms, but I don't like all of the terms, so I'm going to counter your counter, right? And this is where it really gets sticky with a lot of people mentally, agents, brokers as well. They figure since they didn't accept the first counter offer, number one, then all the terms there are gone. And I want to make this really clear with everybody. Unless you reject that counter offer, right? Because if you reject it, it's that, right? Then you're back to the original contract because you said all of the terms in your counteroffer are rejected. Let's say there were 3, right? I'm rejecting all of them. When I say I reject the counteroffer, I'm rejecting all of them. But if I don't reject it, but I counteroffer your counteroffer, and I'm okay with the new term being added, but I don't want to remove this section, and that's what my counteroffer says, and everybody signs off and accepts it, then this term bleeds through, just like our transparency, and this one stays versus being removed, right? Is everybody tracking me?
Yep.
So the point I'm trying to make is, and to Barb's question, if I remember correctly, she was asking, well, if a lot of agents have told her, this is where it gets dicey for her. She says, well, the agents are telling me, and I may or may not have said, I don't give a what the agent thinks. It doesn't change what is contract law. So don't listen to them. But that's essentially what she was being told was, well, because they counteroffered something, then what was in counteroffer 1 is all gone. I'm like, no, not unless it's rejected.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
if it's not rejected, then the stack of transparencies, whatever bleeds through, bleeds through. Okay. And this is really important for us. You know, we have this fiduciary of reasonable care for our clients. I mean, if you take roughly the median sales price of $500,000 and get a 3% commission on it, that's 15 grand. And if somebody gets litigious and you get to defend yourself in court, or let's say it's $1 million property, now it's a $30,000 commission, and you made the oopsie, I didn't understand how offers worked and counter offers worked, it's not going to play very well for you and your liability in litigation. They're going to be like, what the freak's wrong with you? You're the professional, right? Not only were you did pre-licensing courses, you're required to have CE, and you have a broker, and you didn't take advantage of any of those, and you put these guys at a disadvantage, your clients. Yeah, you're in the liability game. We're coming after you for some money, right? So yeah. This has real world application is what I'm trying to tell you. Quite often the things that seem so fundamental in our business that we take them for granted, like how hard could it be? Well, we've just exposed several situations where like, I'm not sure how that, right? Initially it's like, unless you really sit down and think through it for a minute, you might get it wrong, right? And especially when the other side is wrong and telling you, yeah, you're right. That's when it gets really bad. So, all right. So that was the 3 scenarios. And then of course, the 4th one I put is addend, which is, this should seem simple as well, right? If you're go through the due diligence period, right? And something comes up, roof repair, whatever, and they send over, what are they going to send over? Do you know the name of the document? Due diligence resolution addendum.
Yeah.
They send that over and it's an addendum, right? What is the fundamental nature of our contract when it comes to any repairs? Section 10.2, the seller is offering and the buyer is buying in its as-is condition. So there is no pre-requirement to accept anything. And this gets totally manipulated by the buyer's agents all the time. Well, we have the right. No, you have the right to ask. And we absolutely have the right to reject 100% because that's where the contract started. You should explain that to your client, right? You're buying it, we're offering it, and you're buying it in its as-is condition unless we can make it mutually beneficial for both of us and we agree to further modify the contract with an addendum. That's what the due diligence resolution addendum is. Parker, you're laughing. What are you laughing at?
I just said you can visibly see how much Matt enjoys this.
Yeah, everybody's got to have their thing, and mine's just a pathetic one. So, all right. Not agreeing to an addendum doesn't change what was previously agreed to. That's the point I was trying to make with this, with the due diligence resolution. Just because your client, you and your buyer's agent send over a due diligence resolution addendum, I don't even have to respond to it. I know it's bad business practice, but I don't even have, my client doesn't have to respond to it. We have a contract that stands on its own. Now, if I want to be an idiot like that, then you're probably going to advise your client to exit based on section 8.1, right? Due diligence, section 24B, right? And walk because at your sole discretion, you're not happy with the condition of the home. Okay. All right. Since we talked about accepting, rejecting, counteroffering, I wanted to finish off this episode with talking about canceling, because that seems really straightforward, right? Canceling.
You can counter that.
I mute whoever that was. Canceling. What does our contract, I covered this earlier, so it's like seeing if you're paying attention. What is required to cancel? Well, let me ask you a question first. You go through your due diligence, you go through your financing, you go through your appraisal, you get to your settlement deadline, and 5 days later, they have not settled. Where are we with the contract?
I mean, you have a shoot, what's it called? You have a
Who
Default?
didn't perform?
Say that again, Brandon.
Who didn't perform?
Buyer didn't perform. But what's the status of the contract?
Is it
A week after
voidable?
settlement. Say it again, Stockton.
Voidable?
well,
Yeah,
the
so-
buyer's in breach of the contract.
Yes. So Stockton, I don't mean to pick on you, but I'm glad you said what you said, because it's not voidable. That means when I hear voidable, it means I can make it go away, right? And that's not technically contractually accurate. And I hear this, trust me, you're in good company. I hear this from everybody across the board. Well, it's voidable.
Unenforceable,
Say that again.
unenforceable.
Oh no, the contract's absolutely enforceable. It's in
super
play.
enforceable.
It's in play, even though we've gone past settlement. Dan, you hit on the key that I want to focus on with you guys. If somebody doesn't deliver seller's disclosures within the time frame specified, what's the status of the contract?
It's in breach.
There's a default. I'm going to use a slightly better word. It's a breach for sure. It's a default by the terms of the contract. Going past settlement deadline is just like that. You have created a default. It did not make the contract go away. It does not make it voidable. The non-defaulting party then has contractual rights already spelled out, right? If the buyer doesn't perform, right, and we're 3 days, 5 days, 5 minutes past settlement, going to be extreme, the seller has the right to send over a seller's notice of cancellation.
Wait, sorry, Matt. What? How? It's been a week, so 7 days, not 4 days.
Pick a number, Parker.
Right. So
Well, Parker, I think you're conflating whether they've signed and then not funded, but Matt's initial premise is that they've never signed.
They never signed.
Got
They,
it.
they
Okay.
never went to settlement.
Oh,
Good
got
catch,
it. Okay.
Dan. Yep,
All right.
you're right. Because we have 4 days after settlement, right? To have funds provided. Okay. So different than that. Let's okay, what if it's 17 days after the settlement deadline and the buyers haven't signed? Does that change anything? Or do we still just have a default?
Just have a default.
We just have a default. And so the ball is now in the seller's court of how they want to proceed. They can continue. We could do things by the book and extend the settlement deadline. That's a novel idea. What happens if 17 days later, there is no documentation and everybody goes in and signs?
So a signed contract, you get a signed deed on there, right? And like, boy, that complicates it. But like, I think like you've effectively executed on the contract, and so like it's assumed, which is a terrible word, that everybody agreed and decided to move forward, and so that probably trumps the breached contract.
100%. Nailed it, Dan. When our clients sign the new deed of trust, and if there's a corresponding note, unless something in the contract calls out that it extends beyond settlement and closing, then the new deed of trust replaces the terms in the REPC. So
really there's really no like statute of limitations in that situation.
well, you're setting me up, Parker. I appreciate it. It's perfect. Having run into this enough and having some attorney friends over the years, I've had plenty of discussions on this, and they referred me to a couple of Utah Supreme Court cases. And ironically, one of the Supreme Court cases was with Wardley, Better Homes and Garden. So it was actually a real estate company, right? And I'm not going to go through the entire case, but basically the plaintiff was saying, well, we don't have a contract because they didn't perform, or we were harmed because they didn't perform, blah, blah, blah. The net of that, the opinion from the Utah Supreme Court case was only a default has occurred. The contract did not die. I hear this all the time from agents. Well, we went past settlement, so it's dead. No, it isn't. It's not dead. It's still a living contract with a default in it. And so the Utah Supreme Court case said a contract, unless specifically canceled, will continue to live for a reasonable period of time. I love it when they use terms like that, a reasonable period of time. That just gives them leeway, right? They don't get pinned to a specific time frame, because that's a term used in court cases all the time. What was reasonable? So it gives them flexibility. In that particular case, it was over 4 weeks after they had defaulted, and the contract held the court held that the contract was still viable, in play, and executable.
Wow.
Right. And so I get from agents all the time. I have my office managers or TCs like Savannah say, hey, we actually need a cancellation. And they're like, why? It's dead, it's void, because we went past settlement. And it's an education experience to share with them, once again, what is really required so that they can be good agents. So I'm going to pull this over on screen, and
Hey, so while you're doing that, can I interject something?
yeah, please.
This may be where you're drawing this example from, but we had an agent in the office who had a buyer, and the buyer made an offer on a relatively large home. So there was a lot of money at stake, and they never made their earnest money deposit. And the seller decided to like not make a stink of it, and everybody's kind of moving forward, and no earnest money was ever deposited. We went past due diligence. We even went past any other contingencies, and then we went past settlement. And the seller never canceled the contract, even though the buyer was in breach relatively early. And unbeknownst to us, the seller found a new buyer. We kind of figured this out after the fact, found a new buyer, went under contract with that new buyer, and eventually closed with that new buyer without ever canceling our contract. Now, our buyer, to complicate things more, got unhealthy and was in the hospital and some sort of—
I know the contract we're talking about, Dan.
Oh, of course you do. In some sort of incapacitation. And so we were kind of in the dark, and they were in the dark. But if this buyer all of a sudden, got out of the hospital, got its wits about him, and said, hey, I want to exercise this contract, and the seller has already sold it to someone else, boy, that's a world of hurt, right? Like, technically, the buyer probably would have some sort of rights, so buyer number one, right? And they'd have to unwind buyer number two. And yeah, anyway.
Well, the reality is it's pretty hard for the court to bring themselves to unwind the deal on deal number two. What buyer number one would have would be a boatload of damages against the seller. Even though they were in default, the seller never did anything about the default. They didn't cure the default. They allowed the contract to continue on with ramifications and then double booked the contract, right? So yeah, we got extremely lucky on that deal because the earnest money was huge. The purchase price was what, 2.4 million?
Yeah, it's something big.
Yeah, right. And people in that category tend to have the ability to litigate things.
Yeah,
So-
that was lots of moving parts in that deal, but yes.
Yeah, but you know,
At the end of the day, we got lucky that they decided to, go outside the contract and find someone else, because then they never rose a stink to us. But
right.
ironically, at the end of the day, our buyer, really could have, had some issues with the seller.
Well, and I'm glad you brought this up because it's driving home the overarching point with cancellations. You damn well better cancel. It's a requirement, right? If not, you've put the same, you as the agent and your client who's relying on you to be the professional and provide reasonable care, and you allowed them to go under contract twice on the same property because you didn't know what you were doing. Oh my gosh, these are the things that give a principal broker nightmares. So it's why I take the time, and yes, Parker, I do show a little passion about it. Because honestly, all joking aside, my experience in 17 years as a principal broker is, and I'm gonna spitball a number here. I would say 60% of the brokers out there that are actually in the broker position, I'm not talking associate brokers, to one degree or another, don't know their head from their butt when it comes to contracts. Dan, you're getting way better. You
That's
are
an admonition. Yeah, that's an admission right there. Admission of guilt.
Okay, I highlighted this just on a blank addendum because this helps reinforce what we've talked about, the additive nature of contracts, right? An addendum, which could be marked as an addendum or a counteroffer, has the verbiage on there, because I was talking to Barb about this. Well, it doesn't say in the blank addendum that, all other terms. Well, actually it does, right? In the very heading, including all prior addenda and counteroffers. You don't need to include it again in the blank portion of the blank addendum. It's already in there. It's baked in. Okay, that's the blank addendum. I wanted to show you cancellations. Let me zoom this so I can get it on screen. So I want to talk first about contingent cancellations, right? These should be your best friend, in my opinion. They are way more flexible, and they keep the contract in play to the advantage of your client almost always, right? So we run up against a problem. We're approaching our last deadline, right? Typically F&A, as I like to say it, because it sounds like I'm swearing. The F&A deadline, and we're running out of time, and I get these calls, and it's typically like on a Friday afternoon at 4:45, and the agent's all in a panic, go, what do I do? I can't get the other side to respond, and we've got issues. And I'm like, have you used the contingent cancellation? I'm like, what? The what?
Dude, I swear nobody's heard of this before. I don't know if I've ever seen this before.
Okay, anybody raise your hand if you've seen this. Savannah, you better raise your hand. There, okay. Yeah, so let's see, when was this created? We scroll to the bottom. It's been, well, it was revised in 2018. So we've had it 5 years, right? And it's beautiful.
That's
And
about the time I became a broker.
right? Yeah, you just missed it, Dan.
Yeah, I turned the learning hat off right after this. Yeah, so 2017. Had this come out in 2017, I would know all about it.
Right. So here's the cool thing about it. Three quick sections, just a quick rehearsal. The first one is, what are we up against? What are we trying to change here? We need to extend the due diligence, or we need to extend financing and appraisal, which, by the way, in the new REPC that comes out, I sure as hell hope they break the financing and appraisal deadlines apart and give them their own dates. That would be genius. So we specify what we're trying to change in section 1, right? Section 2 is kind of cool, right? Because it says, if for any reason the seller doesn't accept this addendum, right, by the applicable deadline provided below. So you're going to pick your longest deadline typically, which is going to be F&A. If you don't do that, then this will be our cancellation. It's great. It's great, right? And then, sorry, the 2A is the things that, let's see, If for any reason seller does not accept the terms of the addendum in its entirety by the applicable deadline below, that's what we're selecting, what is the latest deadline, then we're going to use what's in section 3, which is typically our latest deadline, as the deadline for cancellation. And the last paragraph is key. Unless so accepted, meaning this addendum, the REPSI shall be deemed canceled as provided in section 2 above, whereupon, and here's the beauty of it, it's already declaring, whereupon earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer without the requirement of further written authorization from the seller, which is reinforcing language in the contract. But there's a catch to this. There's a big catch to this. Anybody know what it is? I'm just curious how smart you guys are with your reps.
Before we go to the catch, like I've seen this written out by agents over the years, right? Where they'll have this, and it's, you know, realtor chicken scratch, where this is like so much clearer and better.
You know, it's never ceases to amaze me. One, I think it's just kind of not rude, but ignorance, like they don't know this form exists. Dan.
The one thing, Matt, the one thing that I found is that you got to make sure that your client is able to accept cancellation if you send this through, because it just might get canceled.
Sure. And I guess underpinning this, I was assuming that we're good agents and we're explaining consequences of what we have our clients sign. So good point. Make sure they understand if this goes through and it doesn't come back, you're canceled, right? And I think a step further is when you have this language at the bottom that says, whereupon earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer. What does section 16 say about earnest money? There's 3 default remedies for default. The first one is, yep, just like it says here, you're going to take the earnest money. The second one is,
A portion.
you didn't perform, so I'm going to sue you for performance. And what is required of earnest money in that situation?
It stays.
It stays in the trust account. So if you have them do this, you've wiped out option 2 in section 16.
Interesting.
Right? Option number 3, you can release the earnest money and sue for other remedies available, a lot, other damages. And that one, believe it or not, you guys get used quite a bit. Right?
Well, I kind of like this. You could use this to erase section 16 if you think there's going to be a dispute, and just put an unreasonable request in the addendum.
Daryl, you pot stirrer. Oh my gosh. So
just a thought.
but I hope you guys can see this, right? Sometimes we just run out of runway, right? And both parties still want to be engaged, but there's $20,000 of earnest money. My job, one of my premier jobs, one of the things I promise my clients is I'm never going to lose your earnest money without your blessing. And so I will highly utilize this cancellation versus others because it's like ironclad. I'm going to get your 20,000. And most people, let's be honest, most people aren't going to sue for a specific performance. Most. But they do care about their $20,000 of earnest money, right? And so this is great because it gives the other side, I mean, it's a little bit of a leverage play. If you're 3 o'clock on a Friday and it expires at 5 and you call the other agent and be like, dude, we still want to do this deal, but you've got to do this. Otherwise, this is going to be a cancellation and your client's starting over in a little bit of a down market, right? You tend to have a little more pliable people when you position it well.
Can you scroll down just a little bit? I want to see the seller's signatures on it.
I was going to ask the same, Parker. I want to see what this looks like.
Yeah, I got it.
So you can't even counter this.
What's this, acceptance or rejection? Wow.
There is no counter. You're
That's
taking
cool.
it or you're not.
Wow.
Which is beautiful. It's beautiful, right?
And the best time to send this is at 4:59.
No. No, because by and large, you probably want them to accept your new deadlines. You don't want to have to. Now, okay, let's go with that, Parker. Let's say we just literally, it's 10 minutes before and there's no way to get signatures on. So it becomes a cancellation. And then I have agents still say this, oh my gosh, so I've got to start the whole offer all over again.
No, can't you just do an addendum that extends it or
The reinstatement of contract addendum.
That's right.
That's right. And it calls out specific things about, okay, now what are we doing with deadlines, right? What is the nature of the earnest money, right? So this is all a sequencing. This is really good. If you're not using this, or if you're a broker, please make sure your agents are aware of this. Dan will cover this at our next sales meeting in depth. But I want, before we check out here, because we're running out of time, I wanted to go to the actual seller's notice of cancellation. This is, well, by the way, these are both UAR forms. The DRE only has like 5 approved contracts or documents. One's the REPSI, one's the blank addendum, right? The one's the FHA addendum. They don't have an approved cancellation. Isn't that interesting? On their own form, the real estate purchase contract, they don't have a cancellation form. This is a UAR form, a private form. All right, so in here, I don't like this form. I'm just going to make my disclosure up front. What does the contract say is required by way of cancellation? 3 things, come on. In writing, signed by the party,
Delivery.
delivered. Does it have any requirement for a reason?
No.
Principal broker, I like the flexibility, right? As per the terms of the contract, that should be like default language. As per the terms of the contract, that means any and all exits to the contract apply. UAR, I know what they're trying to do here, and I'm not like really faulting them, but my biggest gripe I have in red, because agents take advantage of this and they're idiots. Sorry, I gotta, if my grandson was here, he'd say, Papa, we don't say idiot. I'm like, well, in my line of work, I do. But no, I mean, why give fodder? You would not believe the things that I see in other. And all you do is, if the other side has an attorney, they say, oh my gosh, they offered up something that's not even a term in the contract, and that's the reason for the cancellation. Now we've got a legitimate shot at a fight. Close cousin to that is, well, what if there's a due diligence item? Is that any different from a financing issue, or is there some interplay relationship between those two?
No, there's definitely a difference between your dude. I mean, dude, the one contract that I lost earnest money for my client, and I ended up paying him $2,000 back for it, was because I used that other and I put due diligence deadline, and it was after, and they're like, what are you talking about? And so we lost the money. They want to give the earnest money back because I had put that due diligence deadline instead of just marking seller finance. This was like 16 years ago. I was brand new. So
isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting, of the section 24 dates, there isn't one for due diligence there?
Yeah. So they kept that money. They said, no, we're not giving it back because there is no due diligence.
Yeah, and we could rapidly get into a gray area here, right? There's some other Supreme Court cases that say just because you used one remedy for exit doesn't mean you've exhausted your others, but that means you get to litigate it and prove your case in court, which means you've already lost. So let's not go there. But if I had my druthers, and I've actually talked to the UAR attorneys and the forms committee about creating a notice of cancellation. We're canceling per the terms of the contract signed by the parties. That's it. Right. I said the problem is we rely on our agents, and that's across the spectrum, some good, some bad, to make a determination. And if they get it wrong, we put our clients at jeopardy when they shouldn't be, because the contract provides them, I can exit the contract per the terms of the contract. So it could be F&A, it could be due diligence, it could be non-performance, it could be any number of things. But by specifically declaring it here, you create the potential for a fight, right? So if we have to use this form, I would almost always suggest the third one, or sorry, not seller finance.
Second one.
Just put section 8.3. No additional reasons, no additional explanation, just other section 8.3. Keep it clean. More information is bad information in a cancellation.
Don't give them the rope to hang you.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we are out of time. I hope that was helpful for you today. Isn't it funny? You can take things that we've done for 10, 15, 20 years, and you take a closer look at it, and it's like, maybe I didn't have it completely dialed in. So I applaud you for being on here and sharpening your saw and getting better at your craft. You'll be better for it, and appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, guys, have a good one.
Thank you.